It's the week of the final Disney Lorcana challenge of the season. Honestly, of the year in a way, which is kind of crazy to think that we started these in May and here we are in Seattle already. 10 Disney Lorcana challenges to date. Going to be a very exciting time. With that, there is a gigantic tournament this past weekend called Lorca Quest. 707 players registered for the event down to the final two. But the coolest thing about that is we have a really nice large breakdown, 9 different decks to look at that were successful this past weekend. And honestly, one that's very brand new to the meta game that found success and was able to hit top 64 in this 700 player tournament. Looking forward to breaking this one down, kind of showcasing some of the new developments in one of the more established decks from the metagame, and really just talking through the decisions of where I would be moving into the Disney Lorcana Challenge this weekend. Well, let's get into it. Here's the top 64 breakdown from the Lorca Quest main event. As you can see here, Amber Steel and Ruby Sapphire each at 15 registered decks. Amethyst Emerald found its way to 9, Emerald Steel to 8, Amethyst Ruby to 7, Sapphire Steel to 3, Amethyst Sapphire at 2, one of which was in the top 4, by the way, crazy. Amber Emerald 1, Amber Amethyst 1, Amethyst Steel 1, Emerald Sapphire, and Amber Sapphire. As you can see here, pretty nice breakdown for the event. Lots of really interesting decks to kind of look at and really kind of go through, some of which we've covered a lot on this channel, so we're not going to go explicitly into all of these, but I wanted to take a look at the top 9 or so, and definitely some of the more different ones that we haven't explored yet. And what we're seeing here in the development over the last couple of weeks, and specifically in European tournaments, is that Ruby Amethyst has really fallen down the chart here. I predicted a couple weeks ago that it would probably go from 3 to 5, and that has happened, which is really great because you can kind of see that as the metagame develops, Ruby Amethyst hasn't been able to develop any further, and it could just be finally kind of catching up to a lack of card pull or a lack of development and evolving the deck in the correct ways. But it's also possible that it has to be pulled in too many different directions to be successful as well. Emerald Amethyst has moved its way into 3rd overall, with very close behind it Emerald Steel, having both of those Emerald decks kind of like showcasing their potential. And, Emerald Amethyst has always been a more successful deck in Europe. It's also been a more played deck in Europe. So that might be a reason why Emerald Steel hasn't been there. But hey, Emerald Steel still won this tournament. So, maybe we'll change some minds moving forward. Who knows? All in all, very interesting developments. Amber Steel getting a nice little uptick. It hasn't technically surpassed Ruby Sapphire in most success, but it did at least match it to date, which is the first time we've seen that in a top 64 tournament since the release of Shimmering Skies. All in all, pretty cool to see this meta breakdown, see it develop over the last couple weeks. But with that, let's get into the deck list. Theo took a top 64 of the Lorca Quest playing Amber, Sapphire, Princess, Aggro, Ward deck? Question mark. Honestly, this deck is very interesting, very cool, and plays a ton of cards that I'm sure when he played them, their opponent probably picked up the cards and started reading them. Wendy Darling is a card that we haven't really seen much of as a 4-cost inkable, 3 strength, 1 willpower, 2 lore with ward and support. Very relevant stats on a character, in all honesty. Having ward and 3 strength makes it nearly impossible for Ruby decks to interact with this. Can't be Sisu'd, can't be Medusa, can only be Prepared or Lady Tremaine if it's the only card in play. I really think that this card is doing wonders for this particular deck list. Donald Duck strutting itself as a card that we'd seen in brief times in past metagames as the 5-cost inkable, 4 strength, 3 willpower, 2 lore character with ward. This is another one that's just saying at the end of the game, I'm going to have Wendy, I'm going to have Donald Duck, I'm going to have Belle plus another character potentially to really just kind of finish out games in that manner. We see Amethyst decks do this through goats and gathering knowledges and wisdoms and things like that. This is presenting its own way of doing that, saying, hey, I'm going to utilize the ward keyword and force you to have another be prepared to interact with me because no other cards are really being successful at doing that. All in all, this is an aggro deck at its core. Very interesting choice on certain numbers here, but it's one of those things that I don't have all the information. I have not played with this deck yet. Alice seems like a very far stretch, even in the perfect board states. I think it seems very difficult to rely on Alice, and therefore I would probably just want, honestly, more piglets. If I were looking for like a very quick change to the deck, just having another early cheap threat would be nice. Any type of way to draw a little bit more cards is also what I would be interested in. I don't know if Queen Sensory Core is good enough for this particular list, but I do feel that another way to gain cards outside of Rapunzel and just a few stitches might go a long way in creating consistency for this deck list. But without a doubt, its starting hands are very deadly. Just the amount of lore this deck can gain early, and then the amount of protection it can have from ward late game seems really, really wonderful. The Minnie Mouse with the World's Greatest Criminal Mind on a stick, also very interesting. Works very well with all the support cards that we have going on here. And that could be playing into the role that where Alice is a more effective card in this particular deck. It does means we don't have to rely on Wendy Darling and only the Queen to kind of find ways to utilize our cards like World's Greatest Criminal Mind and Minnie Mouse. All in all, really cool deck to see. Definitely innovative. Love seeing this late into a metagame. Very curious if this is an archetype that can kind of continue to be successful moving forward. Sapphire Steel found its way into a top 16 played by Marion. And what I have to say is if you look at this deck list and you can see that there are 4 rows of cards, which means there's a lot of choice in this deck list. I love it. I'm very fond of Toolbox or tutorish deck lists. I'm very fond of Toolbox deck lists like this one, really deciding, hey, I know these cards are good, but they're only good at a given time within certain matchups, really creating that concept of, hey, this deck can draw so many cards with Hiram, with a whole new world, and things like that, that it's okay for me to have a choice and really kind of walk through different versions and different lines and give myself even more options to play with in every matchup there is. McDuck Manor is making a return in several deck lists this past weekend. I think it is very well positioned in any deck that has the ability to play it early. This deck, if you really look at it though, we don't have any T-Pos. We don't have any one jump aheads. We do have a hideaway that works theoretically with Popsicles and Fortis Spears, but this is not a deck that's looking to play a McDuck Manor on turn 3 like some of the Ruby Sapphire decks from this past weekend that we had seen. But all in all, it's still a nice new inclusion back into this list. Cusco coming out pretty heavy-hearted. Hades makes a return as kind of an opposing way to get rid of the opponent's Tamatoas and other annoying characters like Big Sisu and things like that. 2 Fire the Cannons, 2 Babooms, 1 Let the Storm Rage On, and 1 Along Came Zeus, along with, of course, the 2 Let It Goes and Grab Your Swords is the removal package out of this list. Very, very interesting to see those kind of numbers add up and move around. The uninkable count here is a little worrisome, specifically without Tipu, but realistically, we're a Fishbone Quill deck at heart, and we're always going to be. So getting and finding our Fishbone Quill early is really important. Going back to Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician to pair with 4 Tinkerbell Great Fairies really feels very old school to me. Had not seen that really be successful since Chapter 1 metagame. But here it is in a top 16 of a 700 player tournament. Love to see it. Honestly, Tiny Tactician's one of those cards that when you play it, your opponent probably has to stop the game in its track. It very much freezes the board, which is very interesting. What I would love to say is at the end of this day, only having 1 Ariel, 1 Gaston, 1 Hideaway, 1 Let the Storm Rage On, 1 and then Along Came Zeus, all very interesting choices at the 1 area. And then there's a plethora of 2 areas as well. Very well-designed deck. Very interesting to see this type of success out of something that is this much of a toolbox within the metagame. Huge shout out. Huge shout out on the top 16 finish. Kevin finishing the top 16 at the Lorca Quest as well, sporting Amber Emerald Songs. This deck is the complete opposite of the previous deck, and it looks like a very clean cut 56 cards at 4 ofs, and then 2 coves, 2 crickies. This is kind of the epitome of saying, hey, this is what's consistent, this is what works, and I'm not going to go off curve too much. I'm just going to play with what I know. You can see here, this list from the DLC Toronto list is actually really, really close. There is not much of a difference at all. Very straightforward gameplay. Discard my opponent's hands, draw a bunch of cards with Prince John and Diablo, and have an Under the Sea combo with Kita. This deck has been a deck that over the last couple of weeks we've seen versions of it come in and out. See some new cards being introduced like Morph, similar how Emerald Steel is utilizing Morph to have more shift targets. This is another deck that, if we could add Morph to it, have more shift targets for Diablo, have more shift targets for Kita, then we'd have more ways to kind of like accomplish the Under the Sea goal, which I think is very interesting. We're also seeing versions of this list that have gotten away from some of the more heavier discard, not necessarily utilizing For You Have Forgotten Me and things like that. All in all, I think this deck is still very incredibly well positioned, but it's definitely a strenuous deck to play. Any matchup against Emerald Steel is very difficult and tough. But this deck, it's almost like a complete back and forth of just who can land the Diablo. And on average, they have a better chance and opportunity to land their Diablo and keep it in play if you can't find a cove. So it's a very weird and awkward back and forth. All in all, successful weekend for this deck. Top 16, kind of still showcasing that it's very much a part of the metagame, so you can't just ignore it moving forward. Ruby Amethyst did find a way into the top 8, despite being the 5th most played and represented in the top 64. This deck here is gone back to sporting Finders Keepers. However, we have found a way to kind of still fit different things into this deck list, which I really enjoy. 4 Be Prepared is getting away from the Sisu lines, but having the 4 Be Prepared plus 1 Sisu is wonderful. This deck is no longer a Flynn Rider deck. We went back to Cusco, one at Llama, which I'm a huge fan of. Although I do really enjoy what Flynn Rider has done for this deck overall, I think we've gotten to a point in the metagame where it's just unreliable almost all the time, and every deck has kind of found its way to answer Flynn. So the amount of free wins that you get by playing it are just minimal at best. I love the addition of Lady Tremaine here to kind of keep everyone honest. Specifically, again, when you get into a top 64, when you have decks like this that are showcasing like, hey, I have a Tremaine, I have Sisu, I have Medusa, I have the 4 Beer Preps, I have the 4 Brawls and things like that, and even the 2 Elsas. When your opponent is looking at a deck list like this in open deck list in Top Cut, they're now playing with all of that information in their mind, and it works both ways. It works well for you in the Swiss rounds because your opponent doesn't know and have no idea to play around it. So therefore, you can kind of get people on when they make a play mistake or they overextend a little bit. This is the opposite, though, is that they have information. So now the whole time they are playing thinking like, oh, what if he has this? What if he has that? And it gives you a little bit of leeway to say, well, I don't, but thank you for respecting it. All in all, I think this deck list is very well tuned. I think it's very close to what I would assume a Ruby Amethyst deck is going to look like by the end of it. I do think that Cusco maybe is a bit of a choice card still. I do think that Crab at 4 might be a little bit freedom space there. Also, even Maui at 4. I don't know that we still need that card at 4 and things like that. So there's still a little bit of room here. Finders Keeper has really proven to be kind of an all-star in this list against the matchups that you need it to be. Against your mirror matches that are grindy, against all of the discard decks that are grindy, against Ruby Sapphire that's grindy, take a turn off to draw 3 cards is a very realistic thing to do because neither deck is really gaining too much lore or punishing you too much for taking a turn off. But when you're drawing 3 cards, are we really taking a turn off? Not really. Yeah, we're not adding or establishing board presence, but in most cases, it's okay that we just take that turn off, draw 3 cards, and then set ourselves up for the next several turns. Huge congrats here to Darius. Very well played. Did watch several matches on the day with this deck. Pretty cool experience. Pretty cool and well played. And in the end, this is just Ruby Amethyst, guys. This is what it looks like now. It's pretty much kind of all the same, just this version has Finders Keepers and Llamas that lets you draw even more cards, which, let's be honest, who doesn't want to draw more cards? Hey guys, so I'm very excited to announce that we have officially joined Metafy. We were approached to join their platform. They wanted the Forbidden Mountain on there and represent their brand for them. I'm very excited to be a part of Metafy. There's been some great creators that have joined recently. Sailor and Dale are the two notables for me. Having a Ruby Sapphire guide, that's phenomenal. Having an Emerald Steel Masterclass is phenomenal. We joined, and the first course that we released is the Amethyst Steel Aggro deck for beginner's guide. It's just a nice little quick thing, kind of getting you introduced to why we built the deck the way we did, why specific cards are being utilized, and kind of a moving and building piece as we move forward, as we explore more and more with this archetype. I do believe the archetype only gets better moving forward. It is a great choice for any of your set championships in the final weekend. And honestly, I still think it's a great choice for the DLC because, in my humble opinion, the metagame hasn't shifted enough or changed or altered enough to make this deck any worse. The matchups that it's good in, it's still very good in. The matchups that it's worse in, we now have more information in how to kind of manipulate those decks a little bit better, how to play those decks against those decks a little bit better. So therefore creating more opportunity to kind of shock and surprise your opponent, because this deck is still very underrepresented across many. We have seen a lot of community feedback that have been successful with these decks in set championships since we first released the last video about it. If you want to really understand this deck a little bit better, kind of get through a little bit of the eyes of myself and Dick Burns, who are the authors of this particular guide, you should definitely check the pinned comment below. Check us out on Metafy as well. Very fresh, very new. As we kind of develop over there, we'll see more and more from us on Metafy. Right now, just a very low to the ground start, one session, one tier group to join, which also gets you into our Discord, into the private section of it, which give you access to myself, to Dick Burns, to David Nunez, Scott Landis, Rob Serpay, Colby Jerish. All of those guys are in this Discord at your access for any of the people that grew, that kind of join this tier. So if you're looking to up your game, if you're looking for something different and you're looking to understand how the Doc Aggro deck works, check the pinned comment below or the link in the description. Thank you guys so much. Let's get into the next deck. Yanin took a top 8 with Amber Steel Stongs. This list honestly looks so very close to perfect to me. I think that understanding Cinderella Stouthearted is still very good in the metagame. It is exceptionally good against the Steel mirror matches. It's one of those cards that once it hits play, Emerald Steel has We Don't Talk About Bruno or Bust. Sapphire Steel has Let It Go or Bust. Amethyst Steel has Sweet Gain 3 Lore, sweet card that gains 3 lore every turn and probably beats me. And honestly, it's just a very big threat to the metagame. What I love about this deck, and this is definitely a deck that I want to cover in full moving up very soon on the channel, is the idea that we can play Piglet and Ursula. And the big thing with that is this true understanding that when I'm on the play, all I want to do, honestly, is play a Cinderella into a Piglet, into a 2-drop and a 1-drop, or 2 1-drops and a removal and things like that. All I want to do is get my hand on the table as quickly as possible so then I can play Naveen on 4 and reload it with a whole new world. That is the exact thing I want to do. And the best way I can do that is be aggressive as possible on my play games and kind of just honestly remove my opponent from the equation. This deck is very much a solitaire version deck on the play, but on the draw, Piglet is not as good. So understanding that Ursula, Vanessa is just the best card, turn 1 Cinderella, turn 2 Ursula is probably how we are getting back in games. It's utilizing Cinderella Singer. It's utilizing Ursula Vanessa Singer. There are 4 Zeuses in this deck. That is notable. That's saying that, like, I want to be able to establish board presence early. I want to catch up when I'm behind by utilizing the Singer mechanic. I love this version of this deck list. I think it's almost perfect, if I'm being completely honest. It has everything I want it to have. The only thing that, like, we can debate over, truthfully, is whether or not we need 4 Pete's, because that card is really insane in just about every matchup at this point, and it secures us. It prevents them from doing what they want to do. It just does so much that I think a 4th is almost mandatory, but I understand why 3 kind of can work if we're working in a world where we're drawing 7 cards by turn 4 on average. The other maybe questionable is the World's Greatest Criminal Mind versus Bare Necessities. I think both cards are very good. I think they're both going to do very similar things. I don't know which one is correct. I think Bare Necessities has great lines. I think that World's Greatest Criminal Mind has great lines. With more Sisus in the world, having an answer is great, or having more answers is great. Having answers Tamatoa is great, but it's also great to have an answer to like any location that's going to cause us problems, any be prepared or under the sea, things like that that are cause us problems. Even just removing their Let the Storm Rage on, or their Strength of a Raging Fire, or even their How Far I'll Go, or their One Jump Ahead, or their Fishbone Quill. Like it does do a lot of things, but it also asks us to play a little bit differently, which is why I think the World's Greatest Criminal Mind seems like it fits better overall because it kind of just plays into the style of the deck in general. So maybe that's kind of like where it lands. But I do think that it's a very fair question of what to do with that particular slot in this deck. All in all, huge shout out to Jan in here. Love this deck list. I think that I honestly think that it's as close as it can be to perfect in the current metagame of Disney Lorcana. All right, here we are with Emerald Amethyst now, top 8 of the Lorca quest. This is a deck that honestly has picked up a ton of traction. It's gone through a little bit of developments, but really, this is a really close to same looking deck list. I think the one core change that I'm noticing from this list to past list is the addition of Madam Min Elephant. And I think that this is a really fun and interesting addition, if I'm being honest. The idea of having another confirmed way to pick up Ursula Deceiver is pretty great. Having more additional ways to pick up cards like Cricky or even Elsa is phenomenal. Having additional ways to pick up a card like Anna or Kits can definitely go a long way. What I'm very shocked by of this version in particular is the concept that we might be pretty weak to aggro decks. Having Cursed Merfolks and Pegasus on one, if they're answered by a Fire the Cannons or things like that, we're going to be really far behind in matchups because honestly, Snake is the key to winning those matchups because 3 willpower is so key because it gives you a lot of 2-for-1 trades. Where Bonsai is great in a lot of different matchups, but not in the aggro matchups because it's probably only ever going to get you a 1-for-1 trade. It's also not inkable. So we need to establish early game Snake a lot more often than not. And even cards like Ursula Deceiver don't do anything. So this is really tuned towards a different type of metagame where I think that, we are very potentially successful into the more generic versions of Amber Steel. I'm very worried about this matchup into Emerald Steel at all. I think that we are very all in on Deceiver doing everything we need it to be. I don't think that by only playing one Cloud Kicker, we have enough answers to Diablo or we have enough answers to Ursula Deceiver of all. So there's definitely some questionable things I would change about this list to try and match that because I do fear that this deck going second is very, very difficult to win against some of the newer versions of Amber Steel and Emerald Steel. I'm very confident this list is probably great into Ruby Sapphire. It has all the tools that you want it to be aggressive enough early. And then with the amount of ways to bounce your goat and always protect it, or bounce your rabbit and always protect it, I think it's very, very powerful, and it'll help you grind out games against Ruby Amethyst and grind out games against Ruby Sapphire. So I think that this deck is gone a very good direction. I just think that people should understand that this might be a direction we're going to go for and be a little more aggressive and kind of have a little more staying power in those matchups. But it also comes at the cost of, your steel matchups might not be up to par and might not be exactly where you want them to be. Also, I have to give a gigantic shout out for those that do not know. The name of my son is Oliver Arnold, and it was really cool to see the top 8 of this come out and it be Oliver Arnold. So huge shout out to you. Very, very quickly did me and my wife get a good kick out of this concept that Oliver, at the age of 6 years old, was top 8ing a 700-player tournament. So thank you very much for the short giggle yesterday, and congratulations on your top 8. Samethyst, or Blurple for those that like that instead. That's fine. Sapphire Amethyst is here, and man, did it come to play. A top 4 finish for a very interesting and intriguing version of this deck. That's right. You're looking at this list and you're seeing a deck with no Hiram. Crazy. With no Fishbone Quill, no songs, except for, of course, Friends on the Other Side, because we have to play that card. It's too good, right? In all honesty, this deck is so very interesting and it's so unique. Having this Tipo, honestly, any game that we can play Tipo on 2 and then Scrooge McDuck on 3, having a 5/5 on the board, on the play, I mean, is like so very destructive. It's insane. We've seen the return of Rafiki here, which I think is a really good meta call, specifically in the Europe metagame that has so many Bunzais. Rafiki just straight up keeps it in check and says, yeah, I don't care about that card. But it's also a 3-strength threat, which is really great. Cogsworth is the card that I'm shocked is so low. I really feel like this deck would be a very great Cogsworth deck, and I would love to see that number tick up a little bit more, but it might not need it at all, if I'm being honest. Having the goat finish is great. Having only 3 rabbits is probably another thing that everyone's like, wow, I can't believe this deck can be that successful in this manner. But we are a library deck, and we are a McDuck Manor deck. Again, turn 2 Tipo into a turn 3 McDuck Manor. I mean, that card might gain you 10 lore just by itself, if I'm being honest, which is really crazy. The end game of this deck, I think, is the best. I think that any world where we can utilize Bell so perfectly for removal and then following up with a 2 lore character is great. Turn 3, Scrooge McDuck into a turn 4 Bell, so very powerful. You know, the ability to come into play, remove damage from a character onto an opposing character, to banish one of their characters is such a huge swing play. It's a card that we have not seen a lot of success from moving, in the past because there's not a great shift line for it. But if you can find a way to have big willpower characters stick around, and this deck has Elsa, has Hades, has the bigger Elsa, so we have the 5th Spirit and Spirit of Winter here. 5 willpower, 6 willpower Hades, 6 willpower Elsa, 5 willpower Scrooge McDuck. That's a lot of willpower laying around to utilize Bell and truly kind of just get a full effect out of that card. Greatstone Dragon, I think, is one of the most interesting cards in this deck. Playing 3 of is a true commitment, but it's also looking at this list and saying, hey, I have nearly 50 characters in this deck, and I'm going to use them, and I'm going to gain double benefits out of all of them. If any world where you can play Toolbox Follower, quest with it, draw a card, and then put it in your resource row because of Greatstone Dragon, you got so much out of that card. It's insane. Utilizing, your Cogsworth and your Rafikis on repeat, or your Tipo as a way to accelerate yourself early in the game, and then just go into your resource row late in the game is just saying, I have all the ink that I could possibly ever need. And this deck was really, really fun to watch. I was able to watch it in the top 8 and the top 4. I think maybe even another round as well. Huge shout out to Willow Wolf. I think this is a very creative and innovative way to approach this version of Sapphire Amethyst decks. Huge shout out to you and congrats on the top 4. Ruby Sapphire takes home a 2nd place finish at the Lorca quest this past weekend, played by Lucas. And honestly, this deck was very good. I think this deck continues to be insanely good. But let's take a look at some of the newer cards that we're seeing pop up. This isn't the first time that we've seen the Queen of Hearts pop up. But in all honesty, it feels like it's one of those cards that the moment it does, it makes all the aggro decks think a little bit harder. And I think that that's a good position to be in right now. I do think that this deck has the ability to showcase, like, hey, I'm not defined. I'm not guaranteed. So if I want to play 3 Be Prepared and 3 Sisus, I'm going to. I don't need to play 4 Sisu and 1 Be Prepared. I can make that choice of how I'm going to build this deck. Having Cuscos instead of Hideaways. Having human Sisus back in list. A couple weeks ago, we didn't really see many of them. Now they're all back. Ice Blocks, back on the menu, things like that. Greatstone Dragon, again, one of those cards that's really been showcasing itself against the discard decks. Always phenomenal. All the things that are going on with this list is really a reaction to the metagame that's trying to evolve to compete with this list. So the correction here by Lucas was phenomenal. The other crazy thing about this deck is that the way the event played out was very similar to a DLC. this deck was like a top 64 deck. It was 405 in Swiss and found a way to run it all the way on the draw the entire tournament to a second place finish. That also speaks very, very heavy and credible to this particular list itself. I think adding Queen of Hearts really will catch a lot of opponents off guard. I think a lot of people are turning cards sideways, thinking there is absolutely no punishment whatsoever. And if you have Queen of Hearts, you're going to catch people off guard. That's great. If you can ever, and I mean ever, get rid of a Prince John because your opponent thought they were safe, awesome. Getting rid of early one drops that your opponent's like, yep, I'm just gonna turn my card sideways. I'm gonna gain my one lore, my two lore, whatever it is. Queen of Hearts comes in, removes it. Very good. I think it's one of those times where this might have been the right tournament for it. It might have caught the most people off guard. People now might correct themselves and correct their play a little bit to kind of interact with this. But all in all, very, very well put together deck. Ruby Sapphire, most consistent deck in the metagame, still remains that way. Found a way into the finals again. Very close to winning, in all honesty. May have made a slight play mistake within it. By the way, if you want to watch this event in whole, I'm going to put a link in the description below to Spessy's channel that showcased the 2 days of this tournament. So if you're just looking to watch games from the event, you can find it there. Description, link below, I promise. Let's look at the winning deck. Emerald Steel picks up the win. And in all honesty, this list is, I believe, just 2 cards different from the winning list of DLC Vegas played by Zan Syed. The core edition here is just adding 2 Lucifers to the deck list by removing, I believe, 1 Muse and 1 Cove. I could be a little bit off, but I think that is exactly what happened in this particular list. And, we have seen this deck be successful ever since DLC Vegas. We've seen it be an uptick in playability from set championships and plenty of wins around it. And in all honesty, I think that the most interesting thing I think I've heard from anybody is the idea that after Zan won, he believes the deck list was perfect. And that is so very hard to do, honestly, after a tournament. I think it's very, very easy to finish a tournament and even win the tournament. And at the end of it, say, these are the cards that I would change moving forward at the direction of the metagame. Zan believes that the deck list he played in Vegas was as good as it can get and probably can't get better. So the idea that all we did for this list was take out 2 cards and add 2 Lucifer and find our way to a first place finish in a 700 person tournament showcases that might be true. The deck itself just punishes poor play. It punishes mistakes better than any deck in the metagame, I believe. I watched this deck over and over again over the past weekend just completely torch opponents for not playing optimally or overextending or honestly being greedy. You cannot be greedy against a discard deck, guys. That's like a tip 101. You have to play to your best cards and never, ever assume that you're going to be able to be greedy, because more oftentimes than not, you're going to be punished for it. This list, having Ana can punish you for it, having 4 Hypnotize, having 4 Sudden Chills, in this version, having 2 Lucifers, you can't rely on cards staying in your hand ever. And I think that because of that, I feel really bad, but I think it's Warluluz. I've definitely said your name wrong. I'm very, very sorry. I do apologize. But I believe because of the design of this deck and even just adding in 2 Lucifers, you created a position for opponents to play in very, very difficult spots. And I guarantee you that Lucifer ended games for this player. Do I think that Lucifer is the best card for this deck? No, I don't even think that. I actually don't think you need the card at all. But understanding that, hey, just 2 more ways to discard cards is great. I'd argue that I would have played 4 Anas, if I'm being completely honest. I love Ana to death, so I think that I would have probably just gone up 1 or 2 Anas and then called it the exact same because of how powerful she is and how universal she is. But all in all, it's just proving that this deck is a general threat to the metagame. It is very, very good in the hands of a player that knows how to utilize it. And I really think that it's going to be a deck to contend with still at DLC Saddle this weekend. That's it. That concludes the Lorca Quest breakdown and all of those deck lists that were very successful. But I will say that if you're looking for more of it, there's in the link description below is a direct link to the Inkdex tournament report, and it showcases all of the decks that were registered. Maybe not all of them, but definitely up to the 128 finishes. So if you're looking to kind of just go through the different versions of a deck as you're making your final choices for DLC Seattle or for the final weekend of set championships, then there's a lot of information to go through and kind of look at it. You know, there were 15 Ruby Sapphire decks, there were 15 Amber Steel decks. You can go through, look at the differences, see what fits you best. There was an Amethyst Steel deck that was there that was kind of successful in a top 64 finish. There was an Emerald Sapphire. If you're looking to do something different and have some fun, there is that as well. So there's a lot of information there that if you want to take the time and go through it all, I'll have that in the link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I'm very excited for DLC Seattle this weekend. If you are attending, make sure you come by, say hi, give me a hug. I'm all about it. High fives, handshakes, whatever it is. Sign a card. If you want me to sign up for Bin Mountain, you got it. No problem. Very, very excited to go and participate in the last DLC this weekend. And honestly, I love Seattle. I love the area. I'm looking forward to eating at Pike Place this weekend and exploring it even further. All in all, thank you guys so much for watching today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button for me. Let me know in the comments what your prediction is for DLC Seattle. Who's taking it down? What's taking it down? What are we most excited for in the final weekends of set championships? All that in the comments below. If you enjoy this kind of video, if you enjoy this kind of content, if you like the vibes here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching today. We'll catch you in the next one.